And there's quite a bit of programming that's going to be required for your midterm project. So it's going to take reviewing a lot of what we've already covered over the past few weeks, and then maybe some web research that you need to probably do on your own, which is going to prepare you for working in the industry. But what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to walk you through a similar web page with a form that you can use as a foundation for your page. Now, keep in mind, this isn't going to give you the answers for how you're actually going to do your entire project, but it'll demonstrate an approach, and it'll give you some basics and some structure and how you're going to approach coding your pages, and it's going to provide some hands-on learning experience that you should try to understand, so that you can how to implement, your own page. Okay, so before we get into the demo, I wanted to just show you how we're going to be validating as far as the form. So we're going to be using something similar to this to validate our form. Okay, we're going to have where we check, test something on the form, like basically is a field empty, if it's a required field. And if the form data is valid, then we're going to return true. And if the form data is false, then we're going to return false. So let's go ahead and bounce over again to your editor, and let's create a new folder. Okay, so under here, I'm going to create a new folder called form validation. Okay. And I'm going to create a new file, and this file is going to be our PHP file, and we're going to call it form.jsvalidation.php. Okay, and rather than having you watch me type, because I do type slow, I'm going to kind of jump ahead, but you can always pause the video if you need to copy some of my code. I don't want to make this video very long. I just want to walk you through just so that you understand the basics of how you're going to do yours. And you can do this along with me so that you can have this to refer back to when you're doing your project. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to build my HTML structure on my page. Okay, so I've got my basic structure here. I gave it a title, JavaScript form validation, and I also gave it an H1 with the same thing, JavaScript form validation. Okay, so let's go ahead and start building our form. Now, our form, this one that we're going to do is going to have two fields. We're going to have a name and an age field. And we're going to use the post method, and for our action, we're going to use the PHP self variable to point to the current file in our form action. Okay, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Okay, now the requirement is that we are going to use JavaScript to validate our form fields. So this allows the form data to be checked before it's submitted. Form data validation, can be done on the server side like we've been doing previously using PHP, but it can also be done client side using JavaScript. So when the user, say, clicks the form's submit button, okay, we're going to, the submit event is going to occur. And we're going to use the onSubmit event handler, and this technique is referred to as form handling. So we're going to add to our form, we're going to add an onSubmit event for right now, an event handler, okay? We'll end up putting something in there because, like, say, for instance, when the user clicks the submit button, when we add the submit button, what happens is this onSubmit event handler invokes like whatever function is that we have here. And that function, we're going to create that function. That function is going to test, say, all the appropriate form elements for valid data to make sure that the data is valid. Okay, so this is what's going to trigger that to happen. It's going to go out, you know, find that function that we're going to create in JavaScript, and it's going to validate our form. And then what happens is the validation function is going to confirm again whether our data is valid by returning a true, or it's going to be not valid, returning a false. Now, if it's true, then the form is going to be submitted to the URL that's in the action attribute. The form is not going to be submitted, say, if the data is not valid or if it comes back false. And then we'll have some indication to the user regarding like the errors. We'll display like an alert button or something, alert message or something like that, letting them know that. So again, we're going to be using this concept here regards to the validation function. The function again can encapsulate a group of statements, okay? But it can also send a value back to where, say, it was invoked or called. And this is referred to as the returning value, okay? So we're going to return a value to whatever called this, and in our case it's the submit button, the form that's going to call this. And so we use this JavaScript keyword return to indicate the value that needs to be sent back. So if, say, this is true, if this is valid, then we're going to send back a true, and then if it's not valid, we're going to send back a false. So again, if the data doesn't pass our validation test, whatever validation test that we enter into this for JavaScript, then it's going to send back false. And then also notice that we're also going to have a keyword like that's going to return. So on our onSubmit event handler, it's also going to contain like a keyword return as well. Okay, and this is going to work just like the validate form function. It's going to return a value of true. So if the function returns true, then that means the onSubmit event handler is going to return true. Okay, and same for false. Okay, and if the validate form function returns, say, false, then of course the handler becomes false, and then the form just doesn't get submitted. Okay, and that's what we want to happen. If it doesn't pass the test, we want it to pass back false, and then the onSubmit is going to return false, and it's going to tell the form, no, you're not valid, don't submit it. And then once the function returns a value, then it's finished executing. So even if there's like more statements, like even if we had, which you'll see that, even if we had a whole bunch of other statements here, once it returns something, then it stops there. Okay, it stops and it doesn't even go on to the next thing. Okay, so basically the requirements for this project is to place the JavaScript in a separate file. Okay, so that means that we're going to have to create another file for our JavaScript. But before we do that, let's go ahead and finish creating our form. Okay, all right, so I'm going to go ahead, we're going to add our form fields here. Okay, so here I've added my form fields. I have a label and an input text box for each of my fields, and then I've got my submit button. So you're going to do the same thing, okay? You're going to do the same thing for your project, but of course you're going to have a lot more form fields, okay, for yours. Okay, so now let's go in and let's create our validate form.js file. So here I'm going to create a new file. We're going to call this validate form.js. Okay, and this is where we're going to write our function that we're going to call. So I'm going to say function validate form. Okay, and this is where we're going to put as far as the different validation that we're using. Now, accessing form input can be a little tricky. The form is a property of the document object, okay? And each form element is the property of the form object. So a property of a form element can be a value. Okay, so the HTML, say, for accessing the contents of, say, an input box could look something like this. Okay, so like this. So document forms is a property of document, and then each of the HTML elements is a property of form, and then the elements can have a value, and that's what we want to get. We want to get the value of whatever that form field is. So this is how we would access the content, for instance, of that username box that we created here. Okay. Now the form is identified by forms and then zero, index of 0 to indicate which form can be used. You know, an HTML document can contain like multiple forms. Note that's why we've got an S there. Okay. And the first form, just like an index array, is a 0. Okay. So let's add a validation to check to see if this value is empty. And if it is, then we'll show an alert box. So what we have to do is we're going to be checking that this value, if it's equal to empty, okay, then what we want to do is we want to display an alert box. Okay. And then we also want to return false, because remember, if it's empty, then we don't want the form doesn't pass the test, and we want it to stop. We don't want it to be processed. Okay. So we'll do this also for our user age. So we've done it for username. Let's do it for user age. Okay, so we've added also for user age. And then, like I said, remember I said once it returns a value, then it stops executing. It doesn't matter if there's more lines that need to be, executed. It's going to stop here. So what it's going to do is it's going to do this test first, and if this returns false, it's going to stop. But if this is not true, if this part is not true, if it isn't equal to an empty string, then it's going to go on to the next one. Okay, and it's going to check that one. And if this is not equal to the empty string, then it's going to go on to what's next. And what's next is we want it to return a true, because that means that for me, I only have 2 text boxes that I need to validate. Now for your midterm project, you're going to have more that you're going to validate. You're going to validate all of the required fields. Okay, so you'll have more extensive, and then the last thing you want to do is say return true. Okay, now notice that the values, let me go ahead and save this. Notice that the values false and true are not enclosed in quotes. And this is going to be important because true and false are not strings. They're JavaScript reserve words or keywords, and they represent special values. So if you add quotes around them, then it becomes strings, and then this function is not going to work properly. So again, you're going to do this for all of your required fields in your project. Okay, so now let's go back to our PHP file, and let's embed the onSubmit form handler in the forms tags. And then we also need to reference, remember we got that validate form.js is external, so we need to reference it as well. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so on the onSubmit, on the event handler, I added return, because remember I told you what we wanted to do is return if this is false, if this ends up being false, okay, we want it to return false. This will be replaced with false to this form, and then on submit, if this is false, then it's not going to process this form. But if this ends up being true, it's going to return true, and then it'll process the form. The other thing that we need to do is, remember, we need to we have to have an external, so I need to put lowercase, because this, our web server here, this SiteGround is very case sensitive when it comes to as far as file names. Okay, so make sure, if you have problems, if it can't find a file, it may be because you use a different case. It's very case sensitive. Okay, so we've got that. So we've got those two things. Okay. All right, so now let's go in to our PHP code that we're going to use to process our form according to the requirements. Remember, you're not going to have two different forms. You're not going to have an HTML form and a PHP form. Everything is going to be done in this one single PHP file. Okay, so your form is in here as well as the code to process the form. Okay, so let's come up here and we're going to start off by putting our PHP tags. Okay, so our first thing we want to do is we want to use that if statement that we learned about before that checks to see if the page has been submitted as a post request method. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to add. Okay, so we've done this before. You've seen this before. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to save our field data, our form field data, in a JSON string to a session variable, okay, that's set with the PHP global variable session. Okay, now a few weeks ago we looked at storing data in cookies, on the client computer. This is not what we're going to be doing for this project, because remember, we learned that users can decide not to allow cookies on their system. So PHP provides this alternative to cookies, which I think is going to be better. So with PHP, the user data is going to be stored on the server using the special sessions global array variable. Okay. Now, in order for the PHP sessions to work, each PHP page must call the built-in session start function at the very top of the page. So let's go ahead and let's add that at the very top here. Okay. Now, you got to kind of think about a lot of these things before you start coding. For my script, and you can use it for yours, I'm going to store my JSON string in a session called saved form data. Okay, that's going to be the session that I'm going to, when I'm working with my JSON string, that's what I'm going to be storing it in, so that I can have that continuity and it can be saved across different form processing. The whole string is going to be stored in that session key. Okay, so therefore, in the beginning, I need to check to see if the session has any content. That session that I'm storing it in, does it have any content? So that I can then, if it does have content, I need to work with it. Okay, that means that there was something previously saved in there, and I need to be able to work with that. Now remember, they're going to hit submit several times because you want to have it where people can process several forms, several sets of data with the different forms. So they're going to be hitting submit several times. So it's got to build a continuous list. Okay, so each existing content has to basically be appended with the new content. Okay, that's where this session comes in. So the session is going to hold the existing content, and then we're going to keep appending to it every time they submit something to the form. Okay, so one of the things we need to do is to check to see if the session already exists. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to do within our if statement. Okay, so if it exists or if it's set, then what we're going to do is we need to retrieve it. Okay, we need to retrieve the JSON string from the session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable to hold that JSON string. So if there is a JSON string already in here, I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to store it in create another variable for it. Okay, so I'm taking it and saying, okay, if it's already set, take this data and put it into current data. Okay. Now next, I'm going to convert the JSON data that's in here to an array format and then store it in an array variable because it's going to be easier for me to work with. Okay, and remember we do that We convert it using the JSON decode. Okay, so all of that went into this if statement. Okay, all right, so now let's come outside of that if statement that's checking to see if the session exists. Okay, okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array that's going to store the form data and retrieve it using the post global variable. Okay, and this is what you're going to do for all of the form fields that you have in your project. Okay, now remember, I don't have to validate this like we did, before, like in a few lectures or few activities before, assignments before, because remember I did that on the client side with JavaScript. Okay, so I don't need to do that. So all I need to do is just pull it out and store it using an associative array, okay, into this this variable. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to append this variable, or this new data array, to the existing array variable. Remember, this is the existing array, this is the new array. So I'm going to append it now. Okay, and this is how we do that. Okay, so this is the new data, okay, that's from the form, and this is the existing array. Okay, this is the existing array. All right, and if it didn't exist, if it didn't have anything, then it's going to create it. Okay, it's going to create the array. Okay, here. So if it didn't say have any session data to put any existing data in it, it's going to definitely create it here. Okay, but if it did have some data in it, then it's going to append the new data to it. And now what I want to do is I want to save this new data. Now that I have, I want to save it back. I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to convert it back to a JSON format, because remember, it's in an array format. So I want to convert it back to my JSON format, and I'm going to use that encode function. And so I'm going to create another variable to store that in. Okay, so we're going to be using the encode, like I said, to be able to take that appended data, and we're going to convert it back to like the JSON data, and then we're going to store that in this final data variable. Okay, and then I'm going to take my new JSON string that I have here, and I'm going to store that back into a global session variable. Okay, so I'm taking the final data and I'm putting it back into that that session data. And if that session hadn't been created, it's gonna be created at this point. Now, according to the requirements, I need to display the JSON string with the newly added record. And this is to display at the bottom of the web page. So how I choose to do this is storing this in a variable that I can call later on the page using an echo statement. So I'm going to take this session data and I'm going to store it in a variable that I can use, and then I'm going to be able to echo this out. Let me go ahead and save it. I'm going to be able to echo this out later. Now I could try to just echo out the session variable, but if that session doesn't exist at that point, because remember, the page is going to load first, so the session may not exist yet. If nothing ever got saved to it, then it might cause an error. So for me, this is going to be a cleaner way of doing it. Okay, now because I need to have this variable access outside of this if statement here, I need to declare it at the top of the page. Right now it's just local to the if statement, so let me go ahead and declare it at the very top, and in the beginning it'll be empty. Okay, because it's not going to get data until I actually take my session data and store it in there. Okay. Now, so I can say display my JSON string as my output according to the requirements. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a div here at the bottom of the form, beneath the form, and then I'm going to echo out that output form data variable. Okay, so I also added a little H3 here just to kind of label as far as what this is. So I'm just echoing out. Now, I wouldn't be able to do this if it was still local to the if statement, but because I declared it outside of the if statement, now I can access it. So let's go in and let's try to pull up, let's see what our form looks like and see if we can work it. So it's, let me see, I got it in form validation, form JS validation. Okay, let's make sure that that's an F. Okay. All right, so let's go in and let's create. See, I've tested this already a few times. Okay, so there's our string, and I already had a bunch of stuff already in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in. Let me flush my cache. Okay, it's still sending. And I'm going to show you what it is that because of the fact that I didn't close this browser, that session stayed alive, okay? And if you don't want that, like I don't want that, so what we can do is I want to start with a new form. You know, every time I go in and say I open this browser or I open this tab, I want to start with a new form. So what I can do is I can add some extra code to the like an else statement to the if statement that's going to check the request method. And let's do that. This is not a requirement. You don't have to do it. This is basically all you have to do, okay, as far as for your assignment. Okay, you don't have to do anything else but this, okay. But I'm going to show you a few little extra things that you can do to just kind of enhance your form. So I'm going to copy this. I wonder if I close this and then go back in, will it still have, let me try again, because I wanted to show you how it would initially work. Okay, so I need to clean my data. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. So this is something extra. If I close the entire browser out, then it would close the session. Okay, but I don't want to do that because I'm trying to demo my screens and things like that to you, and I don't want to close my browser out. So this is something that we can do. We can set the session variables and have them like removed. You know, when we want to say reset things. So I'm going to say else unset session saved form data. I think that was the name of the session. That's not right. Okay, and then we can this is going to remove the element name from the PHP, the session. Okay, we're unsetting it, and then because remember before we were checking is it set. Okay, so we're unsetting it, and then we're also going to completely terminate it by calling the session destroy function. Okay, so let me go ahead and save that. Now I may have to close my browser for all of this to work, and if so, I'll just pause the video and kind of relaunch everything. Okay, so let me see if I go in and do that. Reset. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's try this again. Hopefully I don't have to reset everything. But you see how it retains everything into this session, which is kind of a good thing. There we go. Okay, now it's reset it because what I did is I unset it, destroyed it, when it was supposed to create a new session. Okay, it didn't keep that session. And so now it works as we want it to. Okay, so see how it's growing, see how that list is growing. That's what you want to happen. Again, like I said, you don't have to do this. Okay, I just did it because of the fact that me trying to demonstrate this. But with your website, you would have closed out your browser. It's going to reset the session when you close out the browser. But for me, because I kept my browser open and didn't want to close it out, I had to add that extra thing. But everything without this is all you're going to do for your assignment. Okay. Now, I wanted to show you something a little jazzy, just in case you decide you want to have different ways of displaying your JSON string. One of the things that I did was I provided code for you to convert it to an HTML table. So I want to show you that. So this is the code for converting it to an HTML table. So basically, I created the table structure. Okay, so the table in table. The table head is where your headers go for your table. So that's going to be static. So you can write that in. But then everything that's going to go in the body, the table body, which are going to be the other table rows, this is going to be dynamic. Okay. So this is the PHP code that you can use to make this happen. So the first thing is I decoded my my PHP, my data, my JSON data to a PHP array, and then I indicated true just so that it knows that it's an associative array. Okay. Then what I did is I checked to see if the PHP array contained any values, any elements. Okay, and if it does, then this code inside of here is going to get executed. Okay, and the code basically uses a loop. Okay, to iterate over each element in the array, and then it outputs the values in the different cells. So as long as the count is not 0, it's counting. Then it's for each of the values. Then it's creating a row. And then it's creating one cell with the username information in it. Okay, it's creating another cell with the age information in it, and then it's closing out that row. And this is an option that you can do to maybe style your form and add a table if you want to. You don't have to do this. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so I just placed it below, put like a little horizontal rule there, placed it below my output data. So let's go up here and refresh. Okay, so see, it's a table. It's just not styled. Okay, but it is a table. Okay, that's another way of displaying it as well. I want you to display this JSON data. Okay, but if you also want to display maybe it in an HTML file, and then we can also, if you want to add a little bit more, and again, this is optional. You don't have to do it, but if you decide you want to, create like maybe some style to it using like a CSS. If you decide to do that, then make sure that you use, according to the requirements, use an external style sheet. So let me show you what this would look like adding, and I did give you some example styling. And I'm going to show you all of that in a second where you can find everything. But I did give you some example styling. But let me show you what that looks like with some style to it. Okay, so this is the style sheet that I created. So I'm styling the form as well as the table. Okay, and I've provided all of this code for you. And so don't forget, again, it should be an external style sheet. So that means that you're going to have to link it. Okay, in your PHP file. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, And then let's refresh. Okay, and see there's the styling of the table. Now let me show you where you can find all that, because also you can style your your JSON. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that too. So let me show you where you're going to find everything. Okay, so if you go under, it's the last thing on the left here. If you go under midterm project resources, I've got a video that shows you what your midterm form how it's going to perform. Okay, so that you can take a look at the example. I've got some resources here I talked about in the last video, some pseudocode and a form wireframe that I did. This is the code to what you just saw. So if you missed anything, you can always go and look at this code, okay? And then here's a couple of resources for styling. There's that tracker, but this is what I wanted to call your attention to. You can actually pretty up your JSON, so it doesn't just spit out as that long horizontal line of JSON. So let's go ahead. I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so basically you're going to come to where, let me see, where is it? In this encode here. And you're going to put JSON pretty print. Okay, you're going to use that pretty print that was in the resource. Okay, if you go to that resource, it tells you all about it. Okay, and then what you have to do, what it's going to do is it's going to format it with like extra spaces and indents and new lines and things like that. But you have to preserve that when you output. Okay, you've got to preserve that predefined format, and so we use that using the tags, HTML tags. Okay, so I'm going to do a double quote because I'm going to include this output form data variable, but I'm going to use the surrounded by the okay. All right, so that it keeps the format that it prettied up, okay, in this file, in this line of code. Okay, so let's save that. Let's go in and let's refresh. Yeah, we'll go ahead and resend it and see how pretty it is now. Okay, so again, you don't have to do that. Okay, but that's something that you can do if you want to, just to add some extra styling and things like that to your page. But like I said, basically you're just going to create the form and you want to have that output data and all this extra. If you want to do that, you can. So looking back at your form validation, the actual files, basically what's going to be different about yours is that you're going to hear where I only store two field datas in the array, in the new data array. You're going to store all of your fields. Okay, every field that you have in your form, you're going to store in there. Okay, so that's going to be one difference. Of course, this is going to be different because this is going to be your form. And then in the validate form, remember, you're going to validate each field that's a required field because you want to check to see if it's empty. Okay, and then if it is, then you want to send back that alert and do that return false. So I've basically kind of gave you the code to use, but you just need to modify it, based on your form. Okay, and if you run into any problems, please let me know. Okay, so other than that, and then like I said, I've provided some styling and different things. And I've actually provided this code that you can look at this code in the course room. But other than that, happy coding.